What Dr. Ochsner and Dr. Mary Sherman and David Ferry were doing was assembling various products that could be used by the CIA, perhaps by the Mafia, and they were involved with both, that could be used against Castro and against insurgents or mercenaries or groups that were communist that they felt were infiltrating Central and South America.
However, the cancer virus they intended for Castro was proving to be not potent enough. Young Judith came up with the answer.
I convinced Dr. Ochsner and others that the real thing we need to do is pull down Castro's immune system by using several ploys, and then when the cancer is introduced into his body, it would be found in his blood system. They'd put him in front of the x-ray again and again and again. He'd be injected again and again. Supposedly he'd be getting treatments to kill the cancer when actually his immune system is getting destroyed. That could be done. In other words, Castro could be eliminated by using the x-ray, and they'll think that it's the side effects from lung cancer. And that was my idea.
Judith and Lee felt intense pressure to succeed. They were horrified to learn that some of the sponsors of the Kill Castro program were also interested in getting rid of Kennedy because of his perceived failure to deal with the communist threat so close to America's shores.
We were aware of this through David Ferry, who had infiltrated groups who were planning or trying to kill Kennedy and or to kill Castro. By focusing on Cuba, if Castro were dead and taking over Cuba again, everybody would be satisfied. The military, the CIA, the Mafia, and other elements, the anti-Castroites. Everybody would be happy if Castro were out of the picture. Otherwise, it seemed that these people really basically were focused on eliminating Kennedy, and then they could do as they pleased with Cuba, with another administration. And a lot of these people had a lot of power. It was a frightening thing for me to hear about all these things.
But for Agent Oswald, the Kill Castro project was only one of several undercover assignments that summer, as Judith learned.
First of all, he and Guy Bannister went out and worked with students trying to uncover radicals that were on campus. This is very important. They were getting ready to leave for the summer, and Guy Bannister was convinced that these students would be agitators during the summer for pro-civil rights events and so on. On the other hand, as soon as these students left, which was at the end of May when school got out, Lee was then free, of course, to try and kind of polish up his pro-Castro end of things, because he was supposed to be a pro-Castro person eventually, to be groomed enough and to be able to enter Cuba if they ever wanted him to go to Cuba.
This alleyway behind Riley's had often provided Oswald with the means of slipping away unobserved to pursue these intelligence assignments. But by mid-July, those days were drawing to an end.
They needed an excuse to fire Lee because he'd actually fulfilled all the anti-Castro things he'd done with Guy Bannister and so on, and he was moving into a new phase, and that was to promote his pro-Castro image. That was going to be on television.
Well, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist as a threat, but that does not mean, however, I'm a communist.
Pamphleteering, all kinds of things to make him look like a pro-Castro maniac, practically. And here he's working at Riley. This is a right-wing company. I mean, it would be a disaster. So, of course, they did not want Lee Oswald on the premises anymore.
Lee was fired on a pretext, and Judith soon followed because of her associations with him. But her hard work at the lab had paid off. The cancer virus required just one final test before it's dispatched to Cuba.
It was made clear to me, and I felt very badly about it, that human volunteers, so-called, would have to be relied upon to test the materials. When this was made, when I realized that this was happening, I had some ethical objections.
The plan was to bring prisoners to this Louisiana mental hospital from the Angola penitentiary 30 miles away. Here they would be injected with the cancer virus created to kill Castro, to prove its effectiveness.
Well, I did something I had been told not to do. I wrote a note to Dr. Ochsner, and I signed it with my initials, J.A., and in it I protested the use of human beings at this stage in the project, under the grounds that these were unwitting volunteers. They were not aware that they were going to be injected with live cancer cells, and the goal was to kill them with it. And of course, they were going to be volunteering for that. So I did object, and Oxner called me on the phone, and he was furious and said I never should have written anything that was linked to me by any kind of paper or handwriting or anything. If I had any objections, I should have told him in person. And he said at that time that both Lee and I were expendable. And then he slammed the phone down. By expendable, he meant, it was very clear to me and Lee both, that they could get rid of us at any time if we were going to cause problems, because this was a project that was much, much bigger than any little Lee Oswald or any little Judy Baker.
So, in late August, Oswald and Ferry arrived in the small town of Clinton, 130 miles from New Orleans, in a black Cadillac driven by Clay Shaw. Here they met a hospital orderly and awaited phone instructions on where to join the prison convoy, en route from Angola, bringing the volunteers to the nearby mental hospital at Jackson.
It was necessary for David Ferry to make the initial injections. There's a doctor up there who would be taking it on, but he had to be shown how to handle materials. That was the first thing, and David knew how to do injections. Secondly, Lee had to come along because he had learned all these special techniques to handle materials. He'd learned them in the lab working with me. And so, as the experiment was successful, he was selected as the ideal person to take these materials down to Mexico City, where they would be handed over to a contact, a medical student or a medical technician. And those materials would then be taken over to Cuba and handed over in Cuba to a member of Castro's medical team who could be trusted. So that's why Lee Oswald had to be there. Lee Oswald, the orderly, and Clay Shaw, and of course David Ferry entered into Jackson Mental Hospital behind the vehicle that was transporting these prisoners who were going to be injected. In they all went at the same time. The orderly that was with them that they had picked up outside of Clinton showed them where to go inside, and at that time those prisoners received the injections that were necessary to begin this terrible round of injections and x-ray, injections and x-ray that they hoped would actually kill these people.
Judith's ethical objections to the tests at Jackson had made an enemy of Alton Ochsner. But she was required for one final task. They needed to know if the cancer virus had taken.
This test had to be done within 72 hours, and on August 31st, 1963, Lee Oswald drove me up to Jackson. I was wearing my little white outfit, so I looked like a nurse type. I was taken by the orderly up through a freight elevator and then into this area. This person I was taken to see, who was one of the prisoners who had been injected, was in a bed by himself, and I noticed at once that he was thrashing about and he didn't even know where he was. He was quite ill already. This is only within 72 hours of being injected with this material and having been subjected to these high doses of x-ray. And I did finish my reports. I realized that the method, we had hit 100% here with this gentleman at least, and that he was responding as expected, and apparently the method was going to work.
But Alton Ochsner's anger at Judith was unabated, and he reneged on his promise of a place for her at Tulane Medical School. She now had no alternative but to leave New Orleans and Lee and return to Gainesville with her husband. But the young lovers were determined that their affair would not die. They met for the last time at their favorite hotel.
It was a time of grief and a time of great with each other in privacy, and we were able to put some of our dreams out there, lay them on the table and say, how can we meet? How can we get together again? How are we going to handle this? This was not goodbye, this was au revoir. We wanted very much to meet again, not only meet again, but to marry. And we were adamant in these hopes of ours. Neither of us wanted to stay the long term with the mate that we presently had. Both of us felt quite neglected by them. Lee told me about a city called Merida that was down in the Yucatan Peninsula that had CIA contacts located there, and that we would find a way to meet in Merida and get married there. And it was the last time I saw him in the flesh, except for a brief glance at him the next day when we pulled out of town heading toward Fort Walton Beach.